Thanks so much, Ed. I appreciate being here. And before I pull up the PowerPoint, I'll just say that I began my spiritual journey in earnest as a junior in high school when I made my first retreat at the Cincinnati Dominican Mound. And, my older sister who passed away in 1999 was my first spiritual teacher. And she taught me how alive scripture can be. And somewhere along the journey, I kept asking people who I knew were serious about their spiritual journey, what do you do? How do you pray? Because I knew I was called to something more, but I didn't know what the more was. And then I heard a lecture on centering prayer, and I said, this is it. And so I started practicing every day. And even though I got up before my children, they somehow knew because they deemed the room. There was like a little sunroom in our house that I went to every morning, and they called it the prayer room, quite like without prompting. So they kind of knew. Well, so much time passed, and I was diagnosed with some ovarian cysts, and one was complex cyst. And so my primary doctor said, I would tell anybody else that we're going into surgery, but you're going to tell me you're going to try something else. So go ahead and try it. And in 3 weeks, we're going to rescan you. So I just happened to be signed up for an at-home retreat through the Sisters of St. Joseph. And I did that, and I saw I did some energy work. And 3 weeks it was gone. But the important piece is during this retreat, my spiritual director said to me, back up into the chest of Jesus until your heartbeat is one with his, like the beloved disciple, and ask to see what he sees. And I just loved this image. So long after the retreat, I held that image, that posture in my centering prayer until one day I hear, you can't stay here, you know. And my spirit says, I know, but my mind says, I don't know. So I kept asking, what does this mean? And it was really, I was already involved in the universe story, but this is what propelled me deeper. I was invited to let go of the historical Jesus and to enter into the Christ, the Jesus of the entire universe, the cosmic Christ. And so I begin there. I'm going to share the screen, so give me just a minute and take a deep breath and let go of everything that came before this moment. Take another deep breath and feel yourself in your chair. Feel your feet on the ground and the very generous earth supporting you. Open to the divine cosmic energy that is forever pouring itself out for you, in you, and among you. And breathe deeply into the place where you and God are already one. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. And so we see that this poet, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, is indeed a mystic. And along with other mystics and the indigenous people, these wise elders before us have known always what scientists are now saying. The day of my spiritual awakening was the day I saw and knew I saw God in all things and all things in God. And Chief Seattle, Earth does not belong to man, man belongs to Earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And now scientists are mystics as well. Every object, although insignificant and trivial as it may be, a drop of water, a grain of sand, is so amazingly rich and complex that nobody can explain it. Only one word is adequate in front of its awesome complexity and richness: mystery. Einstein tried to unite the macro and micro physics without luck because he was unwilling to engage in the randomness of quantum physics. But string theorists carried out his work, and they now tell us that all is one, that everything in creation is a string vibrating at a different frequency. Their math shows this, but technology is not developed enough to prove it as yet. And so let us begin at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Through the Word, all things were made. Our creation story. As we move through it relates to a calendar year. So at some point you'll hear me say, at this time in our calendar year. I just want to say that up front so you don't get confused later, okay? Imagine nothing. No space, no time, no thing. Nothing. In the beginning was nothing. Nothing except the Debar, the wisdom of God. Then suddenly, when love could no longer contain itself from a single point smaller than a grain of sand, energy burst forth in the form of light and heat, energy erupting with the brilliance of 1 trillion stars and the power of 1,000,000 hurricanes. Thus, 13.8 billion years ago, the universe, pregnant with possibility, billowed out in all directions, creating space and time in which to exist. The primeval fireball, the Christ. In this intense heat, all the protons that would ever exist were forged. Every proton in your body was forged in that moment. After only 1,000,000 years, the universe was spread out enough and cooled down enough that particles bashing into each other could hold together. The first atomic beings, hydrogen and then helium, were formed. Vast clouds of hydrogen and then helium filled the expanding space. The fireball had ended. The age of matter had begun. Through the power of attraction, these clouds, oozing with creativity, organized their elements and gave birth to stars. Trillions and trillions of stars. Once ignited, these stars danced with each other and around each other, forming billions and trillions of galaxies. Circles, spirals, pinwheels, clusters, each a whirling, dancing formation of billions and trillions of stars, each astonishing and beautiful, the cosmic dance. All the elements of chemistry were forged in the intense heat of the core of these stars. This energy of attraction exists on every level of being, alluring atoms, cells, ecosystems, and communities of people. It is the energy we call love. It is what shapes our lives and draws us toward that for which we would give our entire being. When our Milky Way galaxy was about 2/3 through her life, about 5 million years ago, a first-generation star was coming to the end of her life. This star collapsed in on herself and then exploded in a fierce and brilliant blast. Her death gave birth to hundreds of new, more complex elements: carbon, iron, calcium, magnesium, oxygen. Stardust flung far out into space. And again, gravity went to work and drew her metal-rich stardust back into a hot, dense center. And voila, our glorious sun star ignited. The rest of her stardust gathered into 8 fiery planets of molten rock and gases, dancing with their moons in orbit around our sun, our solar system, and our planet. Now, each planet which circles the sun is rich in every element ever made in the stars, but one brought forth life as far as we know. Our planet, her size just right to balance gravity, she formed a rocky crust. Her distance from the sun just right, she grew an atmosphere. And raindrops fell. After centuries of cooling rain, tiny life forms began to grow within her seas. For millions of years, tiny bacteria multiplied quickly and cleaned the water. Before long, their food source was running out. The first planetary crisis was upon us. Some creative cells invented the chlorophyll molecule. They learned to make food from sunlight's energy, and they added oxygen to Earth's atmosphere. Oxygen then became a toxic element in the atmosphere. And so over time, some cells learned to live together as cells with nuclei. Later, sexuality evolved, then the nervous system and backbones. These ancient creatures prepared the way for every complex form of life that followed. Earth's crust keep moving, rocks alive, always churning and ever changing. When Earth was midway through her life, about 2.2 billion years ago, her rocks at last burst from the waters and dry land appeared. Eventually, green patches of life moved up along the barren rock. Then animals, too, began to come ashore. Ages passed, carbon forests covered the land, filled with reptiles and dinosaurs. A great, green, slow-moving Earth. Now, if the whole span of the universe year were but 1 year, it was not until the 28th day of December, just 123 million years ago, that the Earth brought forth flowers. In colorful extravagance. Flowering soon changed the face of the planet. Their seeds were spread on wind and wings and creature coats. Their rich food gave rise to an abundant variety of insects and birds. And mammals began their great unfolding. Thus began the time of Earth's greatest beauty and fluorescence of life, the Cenozoic era. Out of this moving, breathing, dancing fabric of life, on the last day of the universe year, at 10:30 in the evening, the first humans emerged. They looked around and marveled at all they saw. They learned the secrets of every leaf and rock and tree, and moved with the animals and the seasons lightly across the land. They fashioned language and art and cultures, rich in ritual and celebration. For approximately 95% of human history, our ancestors lived as hunters and gatherers. As ages passed, the way of the humans changed. There were those who tamed animals and moved with the herds. Others planted seeds and farmed the land and settled down to live in villages and cities. At 1 minute to midnight on the last day of the universe year, the great civilization, all of ancient history, had only just begun. Empires and kingdoms grew and spread, characterized by monarchy and hierarchy, conquest and colonization. Into this period, just 2,000 years ago, at 4 seconds to midnight in our universe year, Jesus the Christ was born. At 1 second to midnight, experimental science had just begun in Renaissance Europe. And in a mere 300 years, the scientific, industrial, technological phase of human presence has spread from Europe to North America to every corner of the world. Driven by myths of progress, humans are bringing to a close the Cenozoic age, the 65 million year geological era of Earth's greatest variety and abundance of life. Yet at this tremendous cost and suffering to Earth, scientific probing into the heart of matter and the farthest reaches of space has also uncovered supreme mystery, the nature and story of the universe. No previous humans have known this story. We find ourselves not merely witnesses, but each of us a participant in this great unfolding story. We enter a new era of human creativity and responsibility in evolution. We awaken in our time to a universe which is holy, to creation which is not an event of the past, but a living event of the present, in which our wisdom and values are rooted in the fundamental dynamics of the universe, an era in which we realize we are universe in human form. It is now midnight. All creation waits with bated breath. What will the human choose? Okay.
It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew?
Of all creatures, only the human has the capacity to wonder, to celebrate the mysteries of existence, of life and death to such a magnificent creation. Come, let us join the dance of the universe, the great cosmic liturgy. And so let us pray. Teach me to commune with your first word made flesh, your creation, that I may be able to unravel the wondrous words of your second word made flesh, Jesus, through whom, with whom, and in whom I may see myself as another word of yours, made flesh to your honor and glory. Amen. I'm going to ask you to pause for just a second and stay with a word or a phrase that you've heard so far that has resonated with you, that has realigned something in your thinking, or to which you felt a resistance. And Thomas Aquinas said that a mistake in our understanding of creation is a mistake in our understanding of God. Thomas was informed by Greek cosmology, which believed that the universe was a concentric, a series of circles, that it was orderly and stable, immutable, geocentric. Earth was the center. Remember what an upset it was when we realize that the sun is the center and that it was also anthropocentric. Creation was all about the human. This blended nicely with the Middle Ages and the beliefs then informed Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure. And they said, let's understand God in this orderly fashion. So they used reason and logic to make sense of God. And that has informed our theology ever since. This was reinforced by Newtonian science, which saw the universe as a predictable machine based on law and order. The universe invites a new worldview. Our worldview is not simply the way we look at the world. It reaches inward to constitute our innermost being and outward to constitute the world. Worldviews create worlds. A worldview is like the glasses through which we see the world, and every human has their own worldview, whether they know it or not. It manifests tangibly in our religious viewpoints, our political allegiances, our moral practices. It also informs how we see the world and our place in it. So I'm going to go through some examples of what the old cosmology or the old worldview looks like and what this story invites us into as a new worldview. So in the old worldview, God is outside the world, creates from outside the world, is wholly other from the world, and that the human was placed upon earth from someplace else, from someplace we call heaven. And that the only way to get back to God is through the clergy. This is a Western European model, and it's been in existence for primarily the last 300 years, and it's based on dualism or separation of matter and spirit, and it's reinforced by that scientific modern era. Newtonian science was ruled by logic and reason, and so images of God followed. But what we did intentionally is we fit God into a box, just like the universe fit into a box. And all of this was reinforced by the Council of Trent in the 1500s. 4 words came out of that council: white, male, cleric, and celibate. As I said, cleric was the way from which the human gets from earth back to heaven. There's documentation that when people were being baptized at that time, if they were people of color, the priest prayed that they become white in the process of being baptized. Male and celibate speak somewhat for themselves, but these are the 4 words that have defined our church. God is seen as wholly other or outside, the sky god, or the grand puppeteer. If you have a bad day, it's because God deemed it. If you have a great day, it's because God blessed you. And creation is set, and the main characters appear for the last act. And all of creation is here as a backdrop for the human to use and abuse. In Genesis, there's the scripture about man having dominion over creation. And a female Hebrew scripture scholar said that that's because scripture was, at that point, seen through a patriarchal worldview, but that there were several words that could have been translated, and 2 of them would have been cultivate or midwife creation. In the new story is based on non-dualism and the understanding that the entire universe is energy or spirit, and that matter is just spirit slowed down enough for us to touch and see. It begins with the universe as a story that's still unfolding and evolving, and it's our story too. We become co-creators with God in the story. The universe is a living organism, more elegant and sophisticated than we had imagined. It's still evolving with intention, which we call cosmogenesis. The universe is still coming to be. And scientists also say that 13.8 billion years is too short for randomness alone to create such complexity of consciousness. Because remember, biological or time and space, well, we'll see that next, but as time and space evolved, biology evolved, and with biology, consciousness evolved. So there's a consciousness within every being. It's more advanced and more evolved beings. And 3.8 years would be too short for that randomness alone to bring us to this point. And yet, randomness and chaos do exist. This is what quantum physics is telling us. And scientists said if we could rewind the whole film of the universe right back to the Big Bang, it would not unfold in exactly the same way. If the universe had expanded just a trillionth of a second faster, we would be just dust. A trillionth of a second slower, and the universe would have imploded back in on itself. Thomas Berry called this the compassionate curve. And this was a great image for him of God, that there's enough openness for newness to come, but enough structure to keep it from falling apart. The primary laws of the universe are interdependence. Everything is dependent on something else. Paradox. Creation and destruction exist. They're two sides of the same coin. So, in other words, the Paschal mystery is built right into the universe. So people say, where is Jesus in the story? And I say, Jesus went the way of the universe, from life to death to new life. It's based on communion and cooperation, not competition. The species that collaborate are the species that survive. The primary role of the human is in the immanence of it, in the entire universe, and more than the entire universe. This God within all is called panentheism. It's not pantheism, which means that the tree is the fullness of God. What this is saying is that God is within all of God's creation. And Thomas Aquinas even said this, there's such diversity in nature because no one thing could reveal God. David Bohm, a quantum physicist, he talks about the implicate order, which is the ground of the seamlessness or the quantum vacuum, where things seem to emerge and recede out of nothingness. And we might call this the ground of all being. It's both empty and yet full at the same time. Emerging and receding. Life all the time in the universe, emerging and receding. In the old worldview, it's hierarchical, top down. And we can see this slide that God is at the top, and then the male, then the female, then the children, then the animals. Well, some animals are important. And then the plants, the important plants. Maybe we don't like the weeds. And then what we consider inert, earth, dirt, rock. In this worldview, the most important is at the top. It's anthropocentric. The human is the star of the show, as I said before. Elio Delio refers to this as the Florida God. God did all the work in 6 days and then retired to Florida and comes back if the children call and need something. But the truth is there is no earth. The truth is no earth equals no people. The most essential is actually at the bottom. A friend of mine who I was really close to, we were the liturgy committee when we both taught at a Catholic school. When I started getting to the story, she kind of prayed for my mortal soul. I think it just scared her to death. And so she said to me one day, okay, I'm trying to understand, but are you telling me that a tree is just as important as a human, or even more important than a human? And I said, no, I'm telling you that a tree is different important. Every being is essential and every being has its importance in and of itself. In the new story, we see what I was just mentioning. From a single point, time and space were created. And with it came complexity. As time and space expanded, so did complexity increase. And that is biologically and in terms of consciousness. And God is within all of it. God is in every unfolding, every trial and error. God is both the Alpha at the beginning, the prime mover, and the Omega, drawing all things forward into greater union. God is the more that is up ahead, alluring us forward. The universe is holographic. It's holes within holes. And what I mean by this is if you have an atom as a holon, and then a molecule is a holon made up of atoms, and then cells are made up of molecules, and they're a holon, and then cells make up organ systems, which are holons. And in a holographic universe, the smallest unit is the most important. If there were no atoms, there would be nothing else, right? Everything else would collapse in its entirety. It also tells us that, like, if you took holographic photo paper and you took a picture, and then you took Kodak film and took a picture, and took a scissors and ripped both up, the Kodak picture would have somebody's head and somebody's arm and a foot here and somebody's knee. But the holographic paper, the whole group would be in every part of that cut up film. And that is how our universe works. The whole of the universe is in every part. And as I mentioned, cosmogenesis, the universe is still coming to be, and it's evolving with intention, but also with randomness. The universe, in a sense, values what works, and then what doesn't work just falls away. And lastly, we inherited the image of the lone cowboy. And this became really impacted American culture during the time of Ronald Reagan. But we do not exist in isolation. The song, I am a rock, I am an island, is not really true, is it? What happens to any part of us happens to all of us. For example, what happens to water happens to us. We are 70% water. Only 2.5% of Earth's water is fresh water. And of that, 1% is inaccessible because it's in glaciers or snowfields, although they're collapsing pretty quickly these days. But that leaves only about 0.07% available as drinking water. And of that 0.07%, our industry pollutes the water. Our people pollute the water. What happens to the water happens to us. If the water is full of toxicity, so are we. The same is true for air. What happens to the air happens to us. And the soil. If the soil is stripped of its nutrients, so is our food, and then so are we. Thomas Berry said, our future is inseparable from the future of the planet and the universe. What happens to the non-human happens to the human. What happens to the outer world happens to the inner world. In the new worldview, we see this image that I just described. We are part of a whole entire ecosystem, an important part of the ecosystem, as is the cow and its fertilizer, as is the rain, as is the evaporation, the oxygen, the ground, the sky, the trees, the sun, all important and all essential. I'm just going to pause again and say, if you have any questions, I know this has been a lot of information, just make a note of it and we can ask it later. Okay. I'm now going to move into the values or the dynamics of the universe. We talked in the PowerPoint, you heard briefly that this future human that lives in mutually enhancing relationships with Earth and all her beings lives out of the dynamics, the fundamental dynamics of the universe. And so here they are. There are three of them. And I will begin with the first one, which is differentiation. Every entity is unique, new, and different. Diversity is the way of the universe. The universe highly values diversity, complexity, variation. Every being is a non-repeatable epiphany of God. And every moment is pregnant with God. Every being in front of us, every tree or flower we walk past is a one-time epiphany. And if we are not alert, we will miss it. Everything is different. There are no repeats. When I taught first grade, we used to sometimes do units to engage the kids differently, run all the learning through a unit. And we were doing a unit on snow. And I was telling my class, they were first graders, that no two snowflakes are alike. And this little boy, Andrew, cocks his head and he looks at me and he says, "Until next year, right?" And, it was so funny. I had a laugh. But at the same time, what a profound little 6-year-old that he somehow understood if every winter of his life and every winter of every life, there was no two snowflakes alike. It was nearly imaginable, enough to boggle the brain. But it's true. And it's not just snowflakes, bumblebees, roses, pine trees, no two things the same. When we get to know something well, it begs to be named. It just asks to be named. And the closer we get to something, the more it insists on its own identity. And this reminds me of a story of my youngest daughter, who from kindergarten on, she had these best friends that were boy twins. And if you asked her who's your best friend, she'd say, "Tom Jack." And these kids were identical. I mean, I don't think my husband and I could tell them apart till they were like 17. But Mary Kay could tell them apart from behind. She didn't even have to see their face to know who was who, because that's how well she knew them. When we know the interiority of another, when we know the beauty within, the uniqueness of a being, it moves us to reverence and to celebration. I'm reminded of when my grandmother died. My mom asked me, she called from the hospital and said, "Will you go to the house and get grandma's phone book and call so-and-so and let them know?" And I went over and I picked up the phone book and I opened it and I saw her handwriting. And I didn't even know the universe story yet, but I knew that handwriting would never again grace the planet. A one-time non-repeatable epiphany of God. And it also evokes celebration. My mom had 13 kids, and I can say with great certainty that she didn't celebrate being pregnant with each one of us since we were born within 12 and a half years. But every time one of us called her and said we were expecting, whether it was our first, our fourth, her first, or her 25th, she reacted the same way, with just screeching like it was the first time she was becoming a grandma. And I think she recognized and understood the uniqueness of each of those beings who were coming into life and coming into life in her family. And so when we understand differentiation, we find that we are either in reverence or celebration before it. And here's the thing. Our task in this lifetime, and we have only this lifetime, it's a blinking cosmic time to be truly who we are. And this requires great creativity and great courage, because there never was you before, and there never will be another you again. So you don't have any model to copy. But to be truly who you are in this lifetime requires great creativity and great courage to discover, because it can be a lonely path to find out who you are uniquely. The second value is interiority. Every entity is sacred, is a subject. It has a withinness, a power, a presence, a voice, and identity. Every being is self-organized from within that being, like a galaxy. A galaxy just knows how to spin and to create new stars. Thomas is famous for saying this, that the universe is not a conglomeration of objects, but rather a communion of subjects. So everything has a self. And, there was a study done some time ago. I don't know, when I learned the story, I learned this story as well, that a study was done in Russia where they took a mother rabbit and they separated her from her bunnies, and they put her in a submarine under the ocean. And then they systematically killed a bunny and she'd react. Then they'd kill another bunny and she'd react, and so on until all the bunnies were killed. And so that mother bunny was connected in her interior to her babies. Now, Einstein called this, spooky connection at a distance, but it's true. Once you are connected to a being, you'll always be connected across time and space. But every being has within themselves that ability to recognize that withinness of the other, like that mother did her babies. The many plant experiments, but there was one that was done by the meditation group, the Transcendental Meditation Group, where they asked a group of people to meditate on a plant, and they said, meditate on plant A. In the meantime, they had asked, and they were like, I don't know, Washington, D.C., they were in London. And then they asked a researcher at a lab in Phoenix to choose two plants and measure their bioluminescence, how much light they were putting off. And they said, pick two that are pretty equal. So the guy picked A and B. And then the researchers in London said, send energy to plant A. And then an hour later, they asked the guy to remeasure, and plant A was giving off 50% more light. So we know that this proves that every being has a withinness. Even rock. Brian Swim tells a story about how we were always told that the moon just reflects the sun's light, but he says no. The moon or any rock absorbs the light. It interacts, the photons of that light interact with the electrons of whatever it's being it meets, and then it gives off its own unique light. So you are indeed seeing moonlight, not sunlight's reflected. And this is true for every rock. And so even a group of rocks, I'm big into heart rocks, and I remember I'd collect a ton, and then I'd just love looking at each one because they were all so different and unique. And so when we stand in front of the uniqueness of a being, the right relationship or the proper relation to it is awe. Ideas are probably running right through your head when this has happened. All of us can think of a newborn baby the minute you hold a newborn baby. It doesn't have to be your own. It doesn't have to be your grandchild or a relative. A newborn baby has this magic of evoking awe in us. And here's our task. Our task is compassion. And here's the thing. This one requires contemplation to attain it. And what it is if we have the ability to sit with the beauty and the suffering of any and all beings, if we awaken to that depth of interiority in us, that we can hold that inner spaciousness to feel and experience the agony and the ecstasy of every other being, and just imagine it carves a deep well of compassion in us. Is there anything more needed in our world right now? And the third dynamic is communion. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything is hitched to something else. Some atomic particles show us this too, because the way that they can find them is in relationship to other subatomic particles. And they always show up in groups of 3, sometimes 2, but mostly 3s. All is one, right? The story tells us all is one. Genetics tell us all is one. Humans share 98% of our DNA across species, and not just with chimpanzees. With chimpanzees is something like 99.6. We share 98% of DNA across species. We all came from the same energetic fireball. We each carry the elements of the same exploded star. This value teaches us what it says about God is that God is the absolutely related one, perfect, whole, inclusive. When have you known yourself in communion? Brian Swim says, genius smudge. Were there no subjectivity, the universe would collapse into inert, dead extensions. Were there no communion, the universe would collapse into isolated singularities of being. And these dynamics are here for us to understand and participate in. And so we're running out of time, so I'm going to just very, very briefly try to speak to how do we understand God, Jesus, and the Christ in this worldview. And again, this is going to be such an incredibly brief overview, but God is the one who is still coming to be. God is still revealing all that God is. God is the one that is in all, the great I am. God is the great birther. Remember, every moment is pregnant with God. God is always doing something new in our universe. God is immanent within all creation, yet more. That God is also the more. Jesus is the fullness of consciousness. My sister who passed away used to say, what if Jesus was man turned God instead of God turned man? And now there's some real truth to that. Diarmuid O'Murchu, who is a Irish priest and social scientist, and he writes a lot about the universe story, he writes a book called Catching Up with Jesus, in which he says that Jesus's consciousness was so advanced that it was collapsed. He left the planet and that consciousness got collapsed. And he said humans are finally evolving to a place where we can be open to the fullness of his consciousness. Jesus doesn't prepare us for the next life. He ushers in the kingdom now, here on earth. And Christ is where the material and the spiritual meet. The whole sweep of creation is the Christ. And it includes Jesus, who was fully the Christ, but the Christ was more than the person of Jesus. The Christ includes all of creation. You and me, our earth, our solar system, our universe, other universes that may exist. Christ is the whole sweep of creation and the first in God's intention to love. God is relational. And so God had to create to be in relationship with the beloved. So I'm going to take us on another pause, but if you can remember nothing else from tonight, remember this. The essence of the universe story is this: the stars are our ancestors, and out of them, everything comes forth. And so I'm going to just, when you get sent to small groups, I'm leaving it open-ended. I'm not going to ask specific questions. I'm just going to ask you to feel into what has resonated with you tonight. Did you encounter any resistance? And did this material evoke a realignment? And what I mean by that is, like when I first started teaching the story, one of my nieces wanted to take the class, and her younger sister came with, who was maybe 15. And in the middle of the class, Teresa shouts out, "This is what I knew they weren't telling me." And so, she said, "I knew I wasn't getting the whole story." And so, however it is that whatever happens in you, I hope you'll talk about it, and I hope you'll come back with any questions that have arisen.